For us, it really is just going before the leadership of the church and making kind of your request. I'm just going to explain that he and I don't live together anymore, and he's definitely said he wants to live with Robin, that he's totally in love with her or whatever, and he's estranged from my children, and so I feel like it's okay for me to be released. That's what I'm going to say.
In the first few seconds of this episode, something quietly seismic happens, and it's easy to miss if you're not paying close attention. Janelle Brown doesn't just walk away from Kody. She doesn't just emotionally detach. She shuts the door entirely. She removes him, and she removes the cameras. And that distinction matters more than anything else we've seen so far, because when Janelle publicly acknowledges that she has pushed production out of her life, not paused, not taken space, but kicked them out, that's not a storyline. That's a declaration. And if there was ever any lingering doubt about whether this is Janelle's final season, that single action answers it. This isn't a woman negotiating her future anymore. This is a woman closing a chapter she already knows is over. And then, almost quietly, she does something even bigger. She goes back to the church. Not for reconciliation, not for guidance, but for permission to leave. That alone tells you how deep the emotional contradiction runs in this family. The episode opens with Janelle in North Carolina, sitting with Maddie. And right away, the tone feels different. Maddie isn't tiptoeing around her mother's feelings. She isn't romanticizing plural marriage. She calls it what it is, toxic. And she's not wrong. There is something deeply unsettling about a system where a grown woman must ask male authority figures for approval to exit a marriage that has already emotionally ended. Maddie asks the question that cuts straight through all the spiritual language and lands squarely in reality. What happens if they say no? And Janelle's answer is telling. She doesn't say she'd ignore them. She doesn't say she'd walk anyway. She says it would be a crisis of faith. That one sentence reveals everything, because here's the contradiction no one wants to say out loud. The Browns haven't lived by the rules of that church in years. Not quietly, not privately, openly, publicly, intentionally. They drink. They swear. They've abandoned religious dress. They don't tithe. They don't live communally. They expose the inner workings of polygamy on national television. They engage fully with the modern world, socially, culturally, financially. And yet, when it comes time to officially end the marriage, that's when the church suddenly matters again. That's when the authority they've otherwise discarded still has power. And that's not faith, that's conditioning. It's the last invisible thread tying Janelle to a system she intellectually left years ago, but emotionally hasn't been allowed to sever until now. And she does get the release. That part is important. She is officially released. But the story doesn't end there, because Kody immediately begins rewriting history. On screen, Janelle explains that she told Kody what she was doing. His reaction? Indifference. Or at least, that's how she experienced it. He shrugged it off. He warned her they might tell her she couldn't remarry outside the faith, as if that threat still held weight. And Janelle's response is one of the clearest moments of autonomy we've ever heard from her. She doesn't argue doctrine. She doesn't debate theology. She simply says she doesn't care. She'll marry who she wants if she ever chooses to marry again. That should have been the end of it, but then Kody tells a completely different story. He claims he barely remembers the conversation, says it wasn't something he was tracking, says he didn't know. And then, almost casually, he drops a bombshell. He says he actually did go to church leadership, that he tried to ask for a release, and that they told him no. Think about that. For years, Kody has insisted men don't seek releases. That it doesn't work that way. That women are the ones who do it. And now suddenly, he's saying he tried and was denied? This isn't a minor inconsistency. This is a complete narrative reversal. And it raises an uncomfortable question. If he truly didn't care, why would he go at all? The answer is buried in what he doesn't say, because in Kody's world, this isn't just about paperwork. It's about image. It's about eternal status. It's about the idea, deeply ingrained that he is still spiritually bound to these women forever, whether he treats them like wives or not. He says he's not a polygamist anymore, but in his belief system, in the afterlife, he still is, and that's why Janelle seeking a release matters so much more than he lets on, because she doesn't go under vague emotional distress. She goes under abandonment. She tells the leaders exactly what has happened. That Kody lives with Robin, that he's emotionally estranged from her, that he's alienated from her children, that he has removed himself from the marriage entirely, and abandonment in that culture is one of the few acceptable reasons to leave, which means the release isn't just a formality, it's an indictment. It tells the church, in black and white, that Kody failed to maintain his marriage, that he failed to care for his wife, that he walked away, and that's humiliating because now this isn't just a failed relationship. It's official confirmation that he couldn't lead his family the way he claimed. It's proof that the structure he defended collapsed under his watch. So, when Kody suddenly claims he sought a release too after years of saying men don't do that, it sounds less like truth and more like damage control if he asked to be released from his wives. What does that say? That he was willing to abandon them spiritually as well as emotionally. And if that's true, when did that happen? Why is this the first time we're hearing it? This moment changes the entire dynamic. Because Janelle isn't just leaving Kody, she's stripping away the last illusion of control he had, the belief that no matter how he treated his wives, they would remain eternally tied to him, and that's something he was never prepared to lose. But here's what no one was paying attention to yet. This wasn't just Janelle ending a marriage. This was the beginning of Kody losing his narrative entirely. Now that we understand what actually happened with the release, even though the episode carefully avoids showing us the final confirmation, there's another layer here that quietly reveals just how finished Janelle truly is, because production wants you to believe you're watching her walk into the church. The show gives you that symbolic imagery. Janelle walking through what looks like Salt Lake City, contemplative, serious, decisive. It's meant to feel like a spiritual crossroads. But here's the thing no one mentions. That footage isn't real. The church leadership she met with isn't even located where they're showing her. The actual church offices are in Bluffdale, not downtown Salt Lake City. So what we're watching isn't documentation, it's atmosphere. It's production trying to manufacture meaning after the fact. Janelle already did the hard part. She already met with the leaders. She already got the release. What we're seeing is TLC trying to visually catch up to a decision that was made without them, and that distinction matters because shortly after, Janelle posts something on Instagram that confirms what many fans have quietly suspected for a while now. She's not just leaving Kody, she's leaving the show. And the way she says it isn't dramatic. It's reflective. It's calm. It's final. She talks about how strange it is when people believe they know you because they've seen a version of your life on television. She acknowledges that the version viewers saw was real, but incomplete. It didn't include the private thoughts, the silent grief, the confusion she hadn't even been able to name yet. Then she says something that feels small, but actually lands like an earthquake. After the cameras went away, she realized how much of her identity had been shaped by what people thought they knew about her. That's not a woman talking about editing. That's a woman talking about being consumed by a narrative. She describes rebuilding herself once the cameras left, slowly, painfully, beautifully, asking questions she never had space to ask before. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I without the role? And then she makes it even clearer in a second post. She explains that for years, her story was always part of something bigger. She was never just Janelle. She was a sister wife, a supporting character in a larger concept. And while she doesn't say she regrets it, she admits it didn't leave much room to discover who she was outside of that framework. This chapter, she says, is the first time she's had space to ask what kind of life she actually wants. Who she is when she's not being introduced as part of something else. That last line is key because it confirms something a lot of us have been saying for years, as long as these women remained on the S. How? They couldn't fully heal. They couldn't fully process. They couldn't even fully grieve. They were still sister wives, not just in name, but as a brand. As long as cameras were rolling, they were still tied to Kody through production schedules, contracts, storylines, and the unspoken pressure to keep delivering content. They weren't just living their lives, they were packaging them, performing them, reliving their worst moments on cue. And Janelle's post reads like someone who finally stepped off a treadmill she didn't even realize was still moving. What's interesting, though, is how she talks about it as if it's been a long time, as if this distance from the cameras exists for in the past. But the truth is, the show is still airing. Viewers are still watching her through the sister wives lens. And if production really has stepped back, it's only been a matter of months, maybe weeks. Which raises an uncomfortable question. How intense must that clarity have been? If just a short period without cameras felt this life-altering? And here's where the conversation gets complicated. Because when Janelle talks about not knowing who she is anymore, some people struggle with that framing. She was in her 40s when the show began. This wasn't a teenager entering adulthood. This was a fully formed woman. By that point in life, most people have a solid sense of self. So what does she really mean? It may not be that she didn't know who she was, but that she didn't know who she was without the structure of polygamy, without the pressure of religious obligation, without the weight of public perception, without fame, without constant scrutiny. And how could she? How does anyone process the collapse of a decades-long marriage, the unraveling of a belief system, the public judgment of millions, and the unimaginable grief of losing a child, all while cameras are capturing it for entertainment? That's not healing. That's survival. It's one thing to go through heartbreak privately. It's another to have your deepest pain turned into ratings, to know that your lowest moments are being dissected online, to understand that your grief is simultaneously a storyline and a paycheck. And that's where empathy and accountability collide. Because yes, they chose this. They signed up. They benefited financially. They continued even when the cracks were visible. And that makes it complicated to feel pure sympathy, but it's also impossible not to recognize how damaging it is to live through trauma while being required to narrate it for an audience. Janelle stepping away doesn't magically erase the past, but it does finally give her the space to understand how she got there, to examine the systems, religious, marital, and media-driven, that kept her stuck longer than she should have been. And maybe that's the real beginning of freedom, not the release from the church, not the separation from Kody, but the moment she stopped being content. Because once the cameras are gone, there's no one left to perform for. Janelle has a lot of life still in front of her. That part gets lost sometimes in the noise of endings and exits. If she takes care of herself, if her health holds, there's no reason she couldn't have decades ahead of her. 30 years? Maybe more. And that's what makes all of this feel so heavy. Not hopeless, but sobering, because there's a quiet sadness in realizing that someone in their 40s, someone who had already lived so much life, still didn't fully get the chance to live as themselves. Or maybe more accurately, didn't have permission to. It's sad that she feels the need to rediscover herself now. It's sad that a belief system and a television machine intertwined in a way that left so much wreckage behind. And yet, there's no ambiguity left about where she stands. She is done. The cameras are gone. Not paused, not negotiated, gone, and she hasn't hedged her language at all. She's not teasing a break or hinting at future involvement. She's drawing a line, and what's interesting is what that tells us about the show itself, because when you look at Christine's side of things, the contrast couldn't be sharper. Christine has launched a new website. She's openly said she's still filming Sister Wives, which suggests the show isn't canceled, it's shifting. And Janelle may simply be stepping away while others stay. Christine gets a lot of criticism for that. Some viewers feel she should have walked away completely, that she's still participating in something tied to polygamy. But here's the thing that doesn't get acknowledged. Enough. Christine isn't promoting polygamy anymore. She's dismantling it, what we're watching with Christine. This season isn't nostalgia or justification, it's deconstruction. For the first time, she's openly pulling apart the lies they spent years telling. She is naming the things they buried. She's finally saying out loud what polygamy actually felt like behind the carefully curated image. For years, the show wrapped plural marriage in soft lighting and rehearsed talking points. The chaos was minimized. The abuse, the emotional neglect, the hierarchy, all of it was either ignored or reframed as challenges. They tied it up neatly and told the audience this was functional, healthy even, and then, right before Christine left, the cracks became impossible to hide. The basement wife revelation alone shattered the illusion. That wasn't a metaphor, it was a lived experience. A hierarchy so normalized that it didn't even register as abuse until she said it out loud. Now, Christine has something she never had before. Contrast. She's in a marriage where she's prioritized, where affection isn't rationed, where emotional safety isn't conditional. And that gives her language she didn't have before. Because sometimes you don't realize how deeply unhealthy something was until you step into something healthy. Sometimes you don't even have words for the damage until you're no longer living inside it. And that's what we're seeing unfold with Christine and David. It's not performative happiness, it's perspective. She can finally look back and say, that wasn't normal, and mean it. Janelle isn't there yet. Her storyline doesn't have that same framework. She's not unpacking the past publicly. She's not contrasting old and new in the same way. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe she doesn't want to go there. Maybe she doesn't want to relive it. And that choice deserves respect, too. But healing often asks something uncomfortable. It asks for honesty, not regret, but recognition. Acknowledging that something caused harm doesn't erase the good. It doesn't negate the love for your children. It doesn't mean your life was a mistake. But it does mean allowing yourself to say, this wasn't the perfect system I believed it was, and that's hard, especially when belief wasn't just personal, it was religious, cultural, public. When you've been part of a high-control environment, admitting you were wrong can feel unbearable. Admitting you were misled can feel humiliating. Admitting your children were affected can feel devastating. So instead, many people hold on to neutrality, or nostalgia, or silence. And maybe that's where Janelle is right now. She doesn't have to rush. She doesn't owe the audience her trauma processing. But at some point, whether publicly or privately, healing will likely ask her to name what this life actually cost her, because walking away is only the first step. Understanding why you stayed so long is the harder one, and that's where this story is headed next, toward the patterns that kept these women loyal to a system that quietly took more than it gave. Because once you start asking who you are, you eventually have to ask who you were taught to be. There's a moment that comes for almost everyone who leaves a high-control belief system or an abusive dynamic. And it's a moment people don't like to talk about out loud. It's not the anger. It's not even the grief. It's the reckoning. Because once the fog clears, once the adrenaline of escape wears off, something heavier settles in. And for many women who leave polygamy, that moment isn't centered on what was done to them. It's centered on what they brought their children into. I've spoken to women who've left similar environments, and they'll tell you the same thing over and over again. The deepest pain isn't always the neglect they endured or the emotional abuse they survived. It's the realization that while they were trying to survive, their children were absorbing everything: the instability, the favoritism, the emotional chaos, the absence of protection. They'll tell you they wish they had known sooner, that they wish they had left earlier, that they wish they had given their children a life that felt safe instead of conditional. And that guilt, that specific guilt, doesn't fade easily. It follows them into every conversation with their kids, every apology, every attempt to repair something that never should have been broken in the first place. And it's not because they didn't love their children. It's because they were trapped inside their own trauma. When you're trying to survive emotional neglect or religious control, your capacity shrinks. You normalize things you shouldn't, you excuse behavior you shouldn't, and without realizing it. Your children grow up inside that normalization. That's the part that keeps women awake at night long after they leave, and that's why Janelle's silence right now makes sense because she hasn't publicly unpacked that yet. She hasn't gone where Christine and Mary have gone. She hasn't named the harm out loud. And that doesn't mean she never will. It just means she might not be ready. That level of honesty requires safety. It requires distance. It requires space without cameras. And for the first time in over a decade, Janelle finally has that. She didn't just remove Kody from her life. She didn't just step away from a marriage. She removed the audience. She removed the pressure to explain herself. She removed the obligation to perform healing. She removed the constant reminder of who she used to be. Kody is gone. The cameras are gone. The structure that defined her identity for years is gone. And what's left is a woman standing at the beginning of a very quiet, very personal reckoning. One that doesn't need ratings. One that doesn't need confessionals. One that doesn't need approval from a church or a husband or a production company. This isn't a dramatic exit. It's a deliberate one, and whether Janelle ever returns to television or never speaks about this again, one thing is clear. This chapter is closed, not rewritten, not reframed, closed. Now the real work begins, the kind that happens off camera, in private conversations, in apologies, in self-forgiveness, and in the slow rebuilding of a life that finally belongs to her. And that's where I want to hear from you. Do you think Janelle will ever publicly unpack what polygamy truly cost her? Do you think distance from the show will bring clarity or just peace? And do you believe leaving quietly is sometimes the healthiest choice of all? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this resonated with you, give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.